To our third and final webinar on wildfires. This specific webinar is all about wildfire management, taking a look at the broad strokes of wildfire management in Canada, um, and some other topics under this big subject here. So if you've missed the other two webinars in the series, so 2 weeks ago, we talked about what wildfire is. And a recording of that webinar is available on our YouTube channel, the Forest Canada YouTube channel. And last week we went over the impacts of wildfire and wildfire restoration efforts. And this week we're looking at a few different things from fire management history to forest management, touching on topics such as cultural burns, prescribed burns, and then overall wildfire mitigation in and around where people may live. So, if you've never heard of Forest Canada before, hi, welcome. Forest Canada is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to promoting diverse, resilient, thriving forests today and for future generations. I'm realizing now I didn't introduce myself. Hi, my name is Maddie. I am the Senior Coordinator for Education here at Forest Canada. So if you'd like to learn more about us as an organization, please visit our website for more information on us. And we're going to review some things just to make sure we're all on the same page with regards to some of these topics that are just going to come up a few times. So first and foremost, what is a wildfire? Well, a wildfire is a fire that happens in the wild and burns natural fuels like trees, shrubs, and grass. Wildfires require oxygen, heater ignition, and fuel, and they vary in severity depending on other conditions, such as the weather in an area, the topography, or the shape of a landscape. They also vary depending on the climate or the average weather in an area, and of course, fuel availability. So how easy is it to find things that can burn? I will also note that for the most part, I am talking about forest fires. Forest fires are a type of wildfire, but not all wildfires are forest fires. So wildfires like the bigger category that forest fires fall under. Um, and wildfires have a lot of far-reaching impacts on a variety of things. So wildfires can impact our society, they can impact the economy, and of course, they can impact the environment. They can cost quite a lot of money, right? Whether it's fighting those fires and paying for the sorts of tools needed to fight a fire, or it's insured damages and losses after a fire, right? So those are the economic losses. Um, and then environmentally, large scale, intense wildfires can overcome any sort of natural defenses or natural adaptations to fire that might exist. Fires are natural in the boreal forest, but really, really severe ones can cause a lot more harm than good. So we don't just let fires happen without trying to prevent them, right? So there is a management aspect to wildfires. Um, One thing I'll note is that wildfire management is an evolving field. So there's a lot that we're still learning about fire. And there's an incredibly long history of managing fires in the boreal landscape. Later on in this presentation, we are going to be taking a look at cultural burns. But there were, traditional indigenous fire practices maintained on the landscape. But during colonization, indigenous fire practices were seen as scary and sort of a threat to buildings and so on. So the practice of fire suppression sort of became the name of the game, stopping all fires the moment they happened, with no consideration for fires maybe having a natural place in the area. But let's take a look at fire management in the past century, where a lot of these opinions have sort of been changing. So, let's get started in the 1920s, about 100 years ago, where the Petawawa Research Forest was established. This forest is one of the oldest continuing operating research forests in Canada. It is still operating to this day, and it is home to some of the oldest permanent sample plots of forest in the country. But this site was used to research things like fire suppression equipment and studying fire behavior and how fire reacted to different types of fuel. So different plants, different trees at varying levels of either being alive or dead, or whether these plants were, in the spring or the summer or the fall, which stage of life they were in, things like that. As mentioned, fire suppression was the key. It was the main focus of this research. Stopping all fires as soon as possible was sort of the focus of early research. I'm sure we're all familiar with Smokey Bear, telling people like only you can prevent forest fires. However, further research in the 70s and 80s showed that fire is actually nuanced and has a role to play in ecosystems in the boreal forest. There was a shift in fire management policy around this time from that full suppression towards an appropriate response that allowed for some flexibility in decision making around fires. So with that change, fires may be intentionally left to burn under the appropriate circumstances, just to promote more positive ecological effects. And with all of that research, we now have great tools to measure and then communicate things like the danger of fire with the public. So all of this research sort of built up in the 80s and 90s to give us things like the Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System, which not only does it help researchers and people who work in forestry to predict whether or not a fire is going to happen, and if a fire happens, how bad that fire is going to be, but it also gave us this fun forest fire hazard chart, which I'm sure many people are familiar with seeing on the side of the road, which will let you know basically the result of all of this data and modeling and just how risky it is to have a fire near you. We also nowadays have live maps of fires, showing us where the fires are and how they're doing. So this is a map taken just today of currently ongoing fires in Canada. And you can see there's a chart on the side with some colors indicating what the dots mean, and their relative size to one another. So we can see there's a lot of blue dots across British Columbia and Alberta right now, but all of those are labeled as under control fires, which is good. This chart is from the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre. If you would like to see a live chart for yourself and see it update, in the next month or so, you can go to ciffc.ca. So Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre, ciffca.ca. Our understanding of fire is always growing. As time goes on, more research is happening. There's more understanding of how these systems work and how best we can manage fires. But fire behavior is changing in response to a changing climate, which does add to the complexity of wildfire management. We have a lot of tools, we have a lot of research, we have a lot of models, but we are always learning more. Let's go into some management. So, forests are, in many cases, managed landscapes nowadays for a variety of reasons. So, forestry is a very large industry across Canada. So, obviously, there's foresters that are out there planting trees, watching trees grow, inevitably cutting down trees. But that's not all forest management is. Um, you can also manage a landscape for a variety of different reasons. Um, but I'm not getting too far into wildfire management in this talk, just because it is a very, very complex topic. It's really complicated. There's a lot of moving parts in here. Large scale severe fires are all incredibly different from one another, and every fire has to be approached differently, simply because they are all involving different landscapes, different fuels, and different climates or weather conditions. So everything requires potentially different tools and different management practices. That being said, stopping a fire, suppressing a fire is not the entirety of managing the landscape. Reducing the amount of available fuel in a forest is absolutely a part of forest management, and it can reduce the risk of high intensity wildfires. So, if you think about it, if you're taking fuel out of the fire, there's not as much stuff for a big fire to burn, right? The fire is not going to be getting as large if it doesn't have as many things to burn. So you can see on this graphic here, a crowded forest, some people doing some thinning, and then of course a thinned forest that allows for a bit more space. Um, that being said, not all management is going in with chainsaws and dragging stuff out from under the forest floor. How do you think people can make a forest more resilient to fires? And so this is active stuff people can do in the forest to make it, I guess, less likely to burn as hot. So we've got more climate appropriate trees. Don't litter. You know what? That's a good one. Don't litter. Land care, absolutely. If you take care of the land. Yep. Prescribed burns. All right. So, um, this the next few slides I'm going to pass off to someone else. I'd love to introduce all of you to Val. Val is our Director of Restoration, Ecology, and Research here at Forest Canada. Hi, Val.
Hi, Maddie. How are you? What a great
Good.
presentation.
Thank you. Let me know when you want me to flip slides for you, but I've got a few slides here.
Sure, sure. So cultural burning is a little bit different than prescribed burning. I see the audience has some knowledge about prescribed burning, and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that cultural burning has been part of Indigenous communities managing forests and grasslands since time immemorial. So I just wanted to add some of that distinction there from cultural burning. They've existed throughout history in indigenous communities, and they're informed by lived and learned experiences that have been passed down from one generation to the next. These fires are obviously done for many reasons to encourage medicine growth, to ease of travel. You can imagine after a burn goes through, there's less fuel around and tall grasses and shrubby material, so you can see farther through the forest. Um, and also to increase grasses so that the large deer ungulate can come in and eat that wonderful new growth, which is their favorite. Next slide, please. Prescribed burning is again, Western science practice that isn't, not to take away from traditional ecological knowledge. It's a science that takes a lot of planning, many, many months to plan for a prescribed burn. And it's just as is described, there is a prescription that is created and certain perimeters that have to be met before you can actually light that fire for its safety and for the objectives that have been set out in the prescription. There's many reasons to do prescribed burning. Number one would be ecological restoration. Number two would be to lower fuel loads. Um, and to just be clear on your objectives on why you're burning and what the purpose of it is. But it is used as a tool in ecological restorations, particularly for grassland habitats, woodlands, and savannas. Next, please.
So here we have a series of photos. So
Yeah, so this is a photo of a prescribed burn that was taken in southern Ontario. So this is a photo, you can see an oak tree in the center there, and it's got a lot of wild grape and other vegetation kind of crowding that oak tree. So next, please. And here it is after the burn. You can see that not everything burns in a prescribed burn, which is ideal, so that there is refuge for some small rodents and insects even. Maybe some things that can't fly, they still can find refuge. It's not a very hot fire. It's just usually slow and low. It doesn't get crazy and really high flames, so that's the whole point of it, making that prescription so that you can understand how the fire is going to behave. Next, please. So it looks like in this case, the vegetation is still standing, so there wasn't a lot of fuel to eliminate the vegetation around that oak tree, but sometimes even after months after prescribed burn, the vegetation can still not persist. It can die back quite dramatically. So here it is in the following few weeks. It doesn't take very long, 3 to 4 weeks for the grasses to come back. In this picture, you can see a lot of milkweed plants. It's a very beautiful site that isn't very far from where I live, actually.
yeah.
Next page.
And then I've got a last slide for you, Val.
Yeah, there's me. Somebody snuck a picture of me as I was walking away in this prairie. It's the same site. So this is more in the fall after the grasses mature in a season, and that's a beautifully done prescribed burn. That objective was to bring back tall grass prairie in this area.
So now I have a question for the room. First of all, thank you so much, Val. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
your insight on these topics. But question for the room, what did you notice between all of those photos? So we just looked over a series of 5 photos of the same site in Southern Ontario. What did you notice about them? So there was smoke for sure, strong grow back after burning. Absolutely. Um, So that first photo, you saw how scraggly the grasses were on the ground, right? There was potentially a mat of dead grass from the previous year. Everything got burned, again, in a low and slow fire. And a few weeks later, everything was thriving and green and much more lush than it was before that initial burn. All right, I'm going to move on then. So that's looking at wildfire on the landscape, right? And how wildfire can be managed in the forest for, preventing those large, large scale fires that ultimately cause mass environmental damage, a lot of smoke, things like that. but we also need to mitigate or lessen the effects of wildfires on people. Um, and sometimes we have to take a look at how we can manage our own built environments to be more resilient to wildfires. Um, like many Canadians, a lot of us live in and around forested areas or natural areas. Canada is a very large country, and many people are sort of sprawled all over the place. So we have a lot of interaction with nature in our day-to-day lives. Um, so looking at our homes and how they can be more resilient to fire, in Canada, we have FireSmart. So founded in 1993, FireSmart Canada is a national program, once again, run by the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center. So I showed their map earlier, but this is also associated with them. But FireSmart's a national program that helps Canadians increase their neighborhood resilience to wildfires and minimize the negative impacts of said wildfires. It focuses on specific actions people can take near their own home. So, the most important thing for FireSmart is looking at that wildland urban interface. So the area where human development meets the natural environment. So you have two different types of fuel, right? You have wildland fuels, you have those natural trees, shrubs, grasses, all sorts of plant life. But then you have built fuels. You have man-made structures. You have wood for structures, right? You have buildings, you have roofs, you have cars, um, all sorts of things that theoretically could catch fire. Um, they have different burning characteristics. So wildland fuels and built fuels burn differently. Um, and when combined, they can lead to really unpredictable fire conditions. This complex of fuels, so these wildland and urban fuels, um, can be quite overwhelming to deal with. And so minimizing these interactions can make fire management a little bit easier. So with FireSmart, they like to look at three sort of zones around the house. So first, you have your immediate zone. This is sort of a non-combustible area that sort of starts at the house and extends just outside. Um, you can reduce the risk of fire in this immediate area by avoiding planting shrubby trees or like bushes too close to the house. Once you get a little bit further from the house, you have your intermediate zone. The intermediate zone includes things like decks. Once again, you kind of want to avoid planting woody shrubs or trees. And you just want to make sure that things like mulch and firewood piles and so on are kept away from the house because those are quite combustible. Um, And then beyond that, you have the extended zone. So you might not have an extended zone around your house, depends on how close to a forest you are. Um, but in the extended zone, that's where you would want to maybe keep your firewood. And you would also want to make sure there aren't too many evergreen trees clumped really, really close together. And also make sure there are no low-lying branches on trees. FireSmart Canada has a lot of available resources on their website, sort of for all ages. So they have a home safety checklist. You can go through and see how fire smart your house is. They also have a coloring book with all sorts of tips and tricks for how to make a home safe from fires for younger ages. They have fact sheets, activities, and more. So thank you everyone for coming out today. If you'd like any additional resources or to learn more about wildfires, please follow the QR code on screen. We do have Q&A scheduled, so if you have any questions, please put them in to AHA Slides, and we will take your questions. Oh, the first one's a good question. I can answer that. So, can you give us some examples about how fire behaviors have changed due to climate change? Yeah, so ultimately, the climate in Canada is broadly getting warmer and drier. So, because climate is sort of an averaging of weather trends, that average warmth means that it is easier for fires to reach a certain heat. And also dries out stuff a lot better. And dry fuels combust significantly easier than wet fuels. So drier conditions are leading to more fuel becoming available to fires, and thus fires burning more stuff and ultimately burning hotter. That's sort of the big broad trend being seen. Additionally, with climate change, we do get severe weather effects. So we're getting more things like, say, tornadoes that are potentially blowing down large parts of a forest, which can make a lot of fuel available, right? By killing off a lot of trees, you'll wind up with a lot of woody debris on the ground, thus more fuel. You can also get more drought, which less water, more fire. And you'll also get an increase in thunderstorms, which one of the primary sources of ignition for wildfires is lightning strikes. So an increase in thunderstorms leads to an increase of points of ignition. And then with that tied into an increased fuel availability does lead to more fire. I hope that answered that question. Should we expect more wildfires in the next decade or less, owing to climate change and Canada readiness? That's a good question. I truly don't know. Um, it's wildfires are really unpredictable. And I talked about this in previous webinars, but 2023 was our worst year ever on record for wildfires in Canada. And last year, 2025, was the second worst year on record for wildfires. So based off of trends, we should probably anticipate more wildfires. We're relatively ready for them. A lot of these things are being measured and modeled and monitored like the moment they start. But management, it's really hard to predict what the future is going to hold, right? So far, the trend is showing a lot of fire. And I think that's the most I can realistically say, just based off of current trends. Yeah. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you. But there are, again, a lot of resources out there. Looking at sort of the fire maps is a great way to stay abreast of current, fire danger across Canada, and in your specific area as well. So yeah. And with that, I think most people have left the presentation. I'm not expecting any further questions realistically. So thanks again for attending, and have a great rest of your day.